Legolas Greenleaf, long under tree, in joy thou hast lived, beware of the sea. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. Though Legolas would accomplish a great many things during his time in Middle-earth, the sea longing would eventually pull him from his forests. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are looking at Prince Legolas Greenleaf, the Dwarf-friend, and his full character lore. For more information, please check out the related articles and videos in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me. Please relax as we journey back into Middle-earth together. Although his exact date of birth is unknown, Legolas Greenleaf, whose first name also means Greenleaf, or Laia in Quenya, was likely born in the early part of the Third Age, after his grandfather Orifer perished in the War of the Last Alliance, and his father Threnduil became the king of the Greenwood Forest, as I find it is quite unlikely that Legolas fought in the war himself, or was old enough to do so. Legolas was of the Sindarin clan of Elves, and his father, who had once himself lived in Doriath, greatly took after the King Thingol of the Elder Days, which is fitting, as Legolas actually shares many similarities to Beleg Strongbow, both in the tenderness of their personalities and weapon of choice. Legolas would indeed be known for his marksmanship with a bow, but he would also carry a long white knife. He would dress at the Council of Elrond in green and brown colors, and would likely continue to during the quest. And also I would imagine he had golden hair like his father, and was around the same height, probably somewhere over 6 feet tall. As for his history, we again know little to nothing about Legolas before the events of The Lord of the Rings. Perhaps he was in his father's halls when Thorin's company was captured there in 2941, and he might have even played a role in the Battle of Five Armies that same year. Either way, before the Council of Elrond, the Wood Elves of Legolas's homeland of Mirkwood kept the creature Gollum imprisoned, but Gollum was lost due to an abundance of pity on behalf of the Wood Elves. He would travel to the Council of Elrond in Rivendell in 3018 of the Third Age and relay this news, and due to his strength, agility, and perception as a warrior, he would be chosen as the elven representative in the Fellowship of the Ring. I would also add that though Legolas was weaker than the High Elves, his addition to the Fellowship of the Ring was no accident in that regard, for he and his spirit would be harder to detect than one who had seen the two trees, such as Glorfindel. Starting the journey, Legolas kept the rear guard, as his eyes would be peerless in the group. And just as Gimli was the voice of the dwarves in the company, he was the voice of the elves, and would remark when the fellowship went through elven lands such as Eregion, or had run-ins with elven lore or people, like in Lothlorien. His skills would be quite invaluable to the group, especially in Eregion, for he would be able to walk atop the snows of Caradhras with his dexterity and light shoes, and he could assess their road there better than others. He would also prove vital in the fight against the wargs in Eregion. After this, though Legolas did not wish to enter Moria, he would continue with the company, and retained a great amount of loyalty. And he would begin to make nice with Gimli the dwarf at the wishes of Gandalf, for Legolas's kin had imprisoned Gimli's kin all those years ago during the events of The Hobbit. Legolas would fight alongside the company in the Chamber of Mazarbul and ensure that Gimli got out of there safely, and would afterwards recognize the terror that was Durin's Bane, as Legolas remembered the lore of his people and their many fights with the Balrogs of the Elder Days. When the company left Moria and Gandalf behind, they would come to the forest of Lothlorien, and Legolas rejoiced, for his kin hadn't come there for quite some time, and he sang part of the Song of Nimrodel, which alerted the nearby elves of Lorien to the presence of one of their kin. Legolas and Gimli would bicker about having to wear blindfolds, which led to the whole group being blindfolded when they were brought to Caryscalathon. Within Lothlorien, Legolas understood the words of the elves as they sang the lament of Gandalf, and he watched over Gimli, becoming, in fact, good friends with the dwarf during their stay here. This friendship between Legolas and Gimli really began here in Lorien, and would be stronger than any friendship between elf and dwarf in all of the history of Arda, and it would last until the end of the dwarf's last days in his life, and perhaps even longer. And so after Legolas received an elven cloak, brooch, and bow and quiver of the Galathrim, he would use these latter implements, as well as his great skill, to shoot down a Nazgul's fell beast above the Anduin River, and his shot saved the company in that moment, even as Frodo saw white stars adorn Legolas's head. Great would be the well-earned praise of this deed. Later on, Legolas would vote for the company to go to Minas Tirith, but the fellowship would be swiftly broken when the orcs and Uruk-hai of Isengard attacked. Legolas would expend all his arrows during the fight and use his knife as well, but he would surely collect his arrows again afterwards, just as he had done in the warg battle. Thus, when it was just the elf, dwarf, and man Aragorn, Legolas became one of the 3 hunters after lamenting Boromir and singing of the southern wind, which came from the sea. These 3 would hunt the remaining Uruk-hai and orcs across the plains, and once again Legolas's sight proved invaluable in tracking them far across Rohan. When they came close to their quarry, they found rather the riders of Rohan, and when Éomer confronted Gimli, Legolas proved ready to kill Éomer if he threatened his friend. Aragorn would defuse the situation, and Éomer would give to the hunters 2 horses, and so Legolas, with Gimli behind him, rode the horse Arod to the Fangorn forest. Legolas would be intrigued by the nature of the forest, and how the tree they camped by seemed to be glad at the heat of the fire they lit. Legolas and Aragorn would speak about the Fangorn and the strange words Celeborn had for it, and Legolas recalled the Ents. Inside the forest, Legolas would feel young again, a strange thing for an elf who had lived longer than many lives of men. When the 3 hunters encountered the old man they thought was Saruman, Legolas would resist Gimli's urging to shoot him, until the old man made Legolas drop his bow and seemed more dangerous, but before Legolas could hit the wizard, he sent an arrow high that would be consumed by fire, and he cried out in recognition of Mithrandir, Gandalf. Gandalf had indeed returned, and would speak words to Legolas that came from Galadriel, warning of the call of the sea, for if Legolas would hear the cry of gulls on the seashore, his heart would never find rest in the forests again. These words would speak true eventually, but first Legolas would go on to prove to the Rohirrim that the Elves of the North were indeed allies, and not people to be feared. He would ride at Éomer and Gimli's side, as they were all friends now. They would ride on, eventually coming to Helm's Deep and participating in the battle there, and though Legolas did not like the Stone Keep, and called dwarves strange, echoing how Gimli had called elves strange in the Fangorn, Gimli gave Legolas comfort, and throughout the battle they compared scores, even when Legolas ran out of arrows and covered Aragorn's retreat. At the end of the battle, Legolas would lose to Gimli by 1 kill, but he was simply happy to see the dwarf alive. Thus, Legolas and Gimli joined the others on their ride to Isengard, and Legolas was amazed by the Huorns outside of Helm's Deep, and wished to go and explore them, but had to continue forth. Thus, Legolas made an agreement with Gimli that, after the war, Legolas would explore the caves of Aglarond that the dwarf spoke of with Gimli, if Gimli explored Fangorn with him. After coming to Isengard, Legolas and the other hunters caught up with Merry and Pippin, and then attended the conversation with Saruman, and Legolas spoke to Treebeard about Mirkwood, his wish to see the Ents forest and his friendship with Gimli, supporting the dwarf, though the Ent was not so quick to trust him. Once Aragorn wished to take the paths of the dead after the arrival of the Rangers and Elves in the Grey Company, his elven and dwarven companions would not abandon him, and they went forth with him. Gimli wondered why Galadriel did not send some of their own folk as well, but Legolas believed war marched on the lands of the Elves of Mirkwood and Dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, and he was right. And so Legolas went with Aragorn and the others by a different way to Minas Tirith, through the paths of the dead and southwestern Gondor. And while Legolas aided Aragorn, he also saw what a mighty and dreadful lord he might have been, had Aragorn taken the One Ring. For he commanded the undead army of Oathbreakers and broke the Corsairs during the Battle of Pelargir. But Legolas knew the line of Luthien would never fail, and knew that Aragorn was beyond what Sauron could understand. It was also there at Pelargir that Galadriel's warning was fulfilled, for even though Legolas feared not the dead Oathbreakers, he heard the cry of the seagulls, and his heart would forever be turned towards the sea and the west afterwards. But there was still a war to fight and friends to aid, and Legolas took to the Corsair ships and went up Anduin to the Pelennor fields, where he aided in ending the battle. Afterwards he and Gimli walked the streets of Minas Tirith, and Legolas hoped to bring more nature into the city if Aragorn should be king. He would speak with Prince Imrahil and recognize the elven heritage the prince had, and afterwards Legolas said to Gimli that the legacy of men is to continue in times and places unlooked for, as their deeds would outlast either elves or dwarves, but to what end Legolas could not even guess. The two joined Merry and Pippin in the city and told them of their deeds in southern Gondor, and Legolas, in the telling of the story, would see more seagulls, even far away from the ocean, recalling his sea longing. that he should never find true peace under trees anymore. Gimli lamented for the day that Legolas and his fair folk would leave this Middle-earth. After telling their story, Legolas and Gimli would ride with the host of the West to the Battle of the Morannon, and would aid in the final throw against Sauron ere the One Ring was destroyed. And so Legolas attended the group at the fields of Cormallen, and after the celebrations would walk in the woods of Ithilien and sing of the sea, resting in this fashion of the Elves. Now that Sauron had fallen, Legolas knew his time in this Middle-earth was beginning to fade. Indeed, though he was to remain in Gondor for a time after Aragorn's coronation, Legolas would attend the mighty company that journeyed back to Rohan, and would go with Gimli through the caves of Aglarond, and from Isengard they bade farewell to the Fellowship, taking the road back to their homes in the north through Fangorn Forest at last. Legolas was able to do his exploration. Years later, around 20 of the Fourth Age, Legolas and other elves from the Greenwood came south to dwell in Ithilien, making it the fairest country in all the western lands. With them came the aid that Legolas promised Aragorn, nature from Minas Tirith. And in Ithilien, Legolas and the others would dwell for around 100 years until the death of Aragorn. Once King Elisar passed away, Legolas finally abided the sea longing in his heart, and, bringing Gimli Elf-friend with him, he built a grey ship in Ithilien, and went with Gimli to the Undying Lands, in 120 of the Fourth Age. It is in Aman, probably beneath the trees of Eldamar, or perhaps on Tol Eressëa, where Legolas still dwells with the other greats of his kin. Thus, we come to the end of our story about Prince Legolas Greenleaf, the Dwarf-friend. From the tale of Legolas, we see that with skill should come humility and kindness, and with greatness should come care for others that are quite different from us. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this epic character history. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on Legolas Greenleaf? Let me know in the comments below. I quite admire Legolas's addition to The Lord of the Rings, being an elf more simple and kind than other great or more daunting elves in the works. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, and Reese Jenkins. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our patrons. It really goes a long way in helping the channel. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a video on Glamdring the Foehammer. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.